Today on CityCast Nashville, North Nashville's grocery stores are disappearing, forcing neighbors to travel farther, pay more, and have fewer healthy options in their reach. Joining us today is Nashville Banner reporter Sarah Grace Taylor, who's been digging into the area's growing food desert crisis, and Carlos Parti, a North Nashville resident who's been living it. Together, we're asking, how did things get this bad? And how can we fix it? It's Monday, October 27th. I'm your host, Marie Cecile Anderson, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Sarah Grace, you recently reported a big story in the Nashville Banner about the growing food desert in North Nashville. What first tipped you off about the problem there?
Well, it's a couple of things. One, I live in North Nashville, so it was really noticeable to me when the Kroger on Monroe closed, how different that made access to groceries out here. And then a second was I was talking to some people at the Save-A-Lot on Clarksville Highway last year when they were going through a period of time where it was completely unstocked because of some employee problems they were having. And I realized how much of an issue it is for people who don't have cars and live in the same area that I do to access groceries.
So we have talked a lot about food deserts on our show, but could you just remind our listeners what a food desert actually looks like?
So food desert is a term that people who study this issue use to describe when a community doesn't have close, accessible access to a grocery store. So that's something that's reasonably walkable so that you could carry your groceries back to your house. The definition of how close that is kind of varies, but typically it means that a community is 30% or more people who don't have access to that.
Carlos, does that line up with your experience in your neighborhood? I really want people to truly get what's going on here.
Yeah, it looks like nothing healthy. I mean, it's a lot of corner stores. It's a lot of tobacco stores. You got plenty of fast food restaurants that surround the area. But as far as taking care of home or cooking, just a family meal or just being able to, go down the street and get a loaf of bread, it's not accessible as it would be in a different area of town in Nashville.
Has North Nashville always been this way?
Yes and no. So before we had this conversation, I was just like, the food desert, I never really thought about it. Somebody actually, mentioned it to me probably either earlier this year or last year. And, just talked about the options of having farmers markets in the area. And I was like, the first thing I thought about was, we already have farmers market in the area. Why do we, need to keep creating them? And, kind of having this discussion, and then also just paying attention to my neighborhood as well. It's just like, okay, now I understand why we need it. I talked to my grandparents, I talked to my great aunt, and we talked about like some of the locations that they had when they were growing up as kids. They had tons of grocery stores from what I'm hearing and understanding. They had a Risha's, they had a Dean's Market on Buchanan, they had all the Robinsons, they had all these different stores, the Save-A-Lot that we kind of talked and mentioned about, all these markets, these places. And even in my area of North Nashville, we had Gus's Corner Store, and you had a few corner stores that, provided certain necessities to your neighborhood, whether it was bread, butter, milk, eggs, or bologna, or just something to where you can kind of carry over into the next day. And so those were the things that, you looked up to as a kid, or even going to that Gus's Corner Store as a kid for my grandmother and saying, hey, can I get a loaf of bread? I don't have the money, but my grandmother said she'll bring it by tomorrow. It was the sense of community that we had in our neighborhoods, and to the point of where a lot of the people that cared about the neighborhood, they're not there no more, or they couldn't sustain staying in that neighborhood to continue to provide those resources and opportunities. Maybe they had to sell their location, or maybe they died, or maybe they just stopped caring. We don't have any of those places anymore, and it becomes a problem when companies like, the Kroger in North Nashville shuts down for a couple months, and it displaces everyone. So now you go to the Bordeaux, you see people from different communities coming over into the Bordeaux neighborhood. Kroger, trying to get goods and snacks from this Kroger to take back into a whole nother neighborhood.
How many full-size grocery stores are available right now versus the smaller convenience stores?
It depends on how broadly you look at North Nashville. But I mean, generally, there's kind of three full-sized grocery stores. There's the Kroger in Bordeaux, which is like all the way down Clarksville Highway. And then there's the Kroger that's currently closed on Monroe that closed early and earlier than people expected to earlier this year. It's kind of more toward the Germantown Metro Center side of North Nashville. And then there's this Save-A-Lot that has been intermittently, I guess you could consider a full-service grocery store. And that's about it, I think.
You also have the Pick 5 store that's in Bordeaux area that sits on top of the hill as well. A lot of people don't usually go there. We've been going there since I remember going there since I was a kid to get Pick 5, whether you can mix and match meats and stuff like that.
That sounds like so few options.
Yeah, most definitely.
Obviously, I'm in East, and you drive down Gallatin, and there's just grocery store after grocery store after grocery store.
When you think about other areas and demographics, I mean, you see a lot more restaurants, you see a lot more food, grocery stores, you see a Publix, you see a Whole Foods, you see a Trader Joe's. And usually when you think about those establishments, you think when they come to your neighborhood, oh, this means that this is the end of my neighborhood. And they're totally 100% right, because it does, in a sense, drive more traffic towards the neighborhood. It makes the neighborhood more walkable. It makes the neighborhood more safe. It makes it more convenient. But those are the same resources that the people in this community have been needing for probably 15, 20 years plus that they haven't been able to receive. And I think that becomes the problem of where a lot of people are like, I don't really want this big retail grocery store in my neighborhood because I feel like I'm going to be forced and pushed out next after they build this humongous fixation.
Right. Or put in a Starbucks.
Or put in a
Wait a
Starbucks.
minute, we don't want a Starbucks.
Right. Unless you're providing jobs for our neighborhoods and we're creating some type of economic balance.
That's what one woman I spoke to in the story, Bridget Welch, who was at the Save-A-Lot when we talked, she said that the fact that it's a Starbucks and they're, painting it to look a certain kind of way with this gray exterior on the Kroger on Monroe seems like it's to cater to the new renters and to the Germantown side of things at the expense of inconveniencing the neighborhood that's been here that now doesn't have access to a grocery store while they come up with this.
Yeah, you said that the formerly brown brick building has been painted millennial gray. Carlos, what does that signify to you?
That's gentrification.
Millennial gray.
Millennial gray is gentrification. Oh my gosh. It's the weirdest balance because it's like you want your neighborhood, you want your community to continue to grow and you want it to flourish and you want those same opportunities for the kids and the elders to, be able to receive. But it's like we said, it's a thin line. It's a balance of like what the community wants and what the community needs. This will come in, next that'll come in, and it becomes a playing field for any and everybody to play in except the people who actually live there, and that's their backyard and that's what they have been wanting.
Are food deserts mostly driven by geography, or are there other factors at play?
I think in most cases, it's more a demographic thing, right? Like there's just always in every city neighborhoods that are served and neighborhoods that are underserved. Like when I was growing up, North Nashville was not seen as where you wanted to start a business if you wanted to make just gangbusters money. So like Carlos pointed out, these big grocery chains haven't come there because they don't see it as a place they're going to make money. Now you have an increasing number of renters who move to Nashville, want to live close to downtown, and are moving further out into the edges of downtown, which include Germantown, North Nashville. And so you can see that Kroger is maybe trying to cater to those people, or maybe a new grocery chain would come in because they think they'll make money. But that's exactly the serving the new versus the old thing we're talking about. That wasn't your question. But what drives it is probably like a lack of those grocery stores thinking they're going to come make money. And frankly, a lack of the city making the effort that they're making now, I think, to address food deserts previously. Like there's never been a conversation about this, but Carlos pointed out this has been going on for at least a couple of decades in North Nashville. It's not a new problem.
And I think a lot of times it becomes a personal problem. It becomes a community problem. Somebody wants to fix it. And it's like, hey, I'm going to create this store. And the stores that I mentioned in the past that my grandmother or they experienced, those were community driven activities. Those were people who lived in the community. Those were people who knew the community. Those were people who, like I said, will pass a loaf of bread until the next day or until the next payment. And I'm not expecting that from a Kroger's or Starbucks or Whole Foods or any of those things because it's not really I care for you, you care for me thing. It's a bottom line thing. So it's one of those things to where it's like, which side do you, in a sense, play on? Are you going to continue to complain about it? Or what are you going to do to make sure that your efforts are heard and that you put the work in as well? Because, I'm just sitting here talking to y'all. I'm thinking about 3 to 4 different ideas that can be helped and can be done. But I also think it's about the positioning and then about the power. And I think it's also about like who you're working with, because who's to say us starting and sparking this conversation, somebody's listening and saying, hey, I want to give y'all a grocery store. Hey, I have this space in this land. I want y'all to create a farmer's market. If you have property, if you have land, if you have the idea, if you have the positioning to make these things happen, let's figure out how to make them happen. Let's not gatekeep a community that's been starved for decades. Like, let's figure out how we can grow. And I think that's the part that we're like missing when we talk about gentrification, is like, how do we involve the community's efforts, but also how do we create some type of economic growth as well? Because it's not just, I want to come and shop in your store. I want to figure out how I can own a piece of this. I want to learn how, if I'm a business owner, how can I get my products inside of your store? I think it has to change from the aspect of like, we're just people in the community and we just survive. And it's just like, how do we survive just as much as anybody else that's coming into Nashville, or somebody who's moving into North Nashville and they're just like, oh, this is the perfect neighborhood. But somebody that's next door has been like, I've been dreading this and I'm not happy and I'm living above means. So like, how do we, fix that mindset when we think about the food deserts?
Sarah Grace, you wrote in your article, one of the biggest barriers is real estate.
I mean, it's expensive to do anything in Nashville, to rent, to operate a business. Like, it is just increasingly expensive to occupy space and do something here. That also is true of grocery stores. So maybe if you're a large chain, that means you're not going to make the money that you want, and that's why you're not going to go somewhere. But if you're smaller or maybe more community focused, it might not be viable at all for you to pop up in Nashville and to have the real estate. That's one thing that the city, so they're working on getting ideas for how to address food deserts in North Nashville, in South Nashville, and in the other areas where there's this kind of issue. And they were saying that there's an example of a place that just popped up, a community grocery store in Atlanta in a similar area that didn't have a grocery store, where the city was able to kind of co-own this grocery store, make it full service hours where people can go before and after work. There's healthy options. It's somewhat price managed because the city is providing the land, which allows the cost to stay down. And in return, the store is expected to keep costs for consumers down. So that's like all in the ether of what the city is looking at, is how can we leverage land, which is often the most expensive part of operating something like that, and make it feasible for a grocery store. But there's still variables they can't control, like the cost of getting goods from farmers and the impact that tariffs or any other economic factor have. So it's kind of limited what the city can do. And I think that's why land is so central to that thought, is because it's something that they have jurisdiction over.
How have the neighbors in North been taking care of one another in the absence of options?
It's one of those things to where you gotta travel. You gotta go outside of your area. And so it's been one of those things to where, like, neighbors, in a sense, they used to look out for each other, and they were, I'll go grab your groceries, you grab my groceries. But like I said, the makeup of the neighborhood is changing to the point where now you don't know your neighbor. So that's not a huge option. And like she said, the land, it's gone. So a lot of the times you would have a lot of these community stores and those like convenience stores. That's the makeup of North Nashville. Like, they're providing options for the people that live in, whether it's Dodge City or whether it's Cheatham projects. I mean, they're going to these corner stores buying Takis, hot Cheetos, chips, whatever it is to survive to the next day, or until they get lunch, or until they get an Uber Eats, or until whatever that may be. Or even some of these smaller tobacco convenience stores, they're starting to catch on and understand, oh, Kroger's is closed. Let me buy a loaf of bread so I can continue to provide. And it creates a whole nother margin for my business as well. A lot of people don't want to admit, but corner stores were a gathering place for a lot of people. Either it was a good gathering for people who either got off work for that day or were hanging out, or it was people where people were either selling drugs or they were just there in front of the store. And so a lot of the times people, look at it as if like, oh, once we get these out of our neighborhood will be a whole lot better. But they don't realize that once you kind of get rid of those center stones and those points in the neighborhood, you, in a sense, lose the neighborhood as well, and you lose those access points. And then even now that you kind of have access to a Uber Eats or a Walmart delivery of those certain things, I know it kind of creates more access for people who don't have transportation to those places. But it also kind of creates a thing to where you're constantly spending money. You're like in this rat race of like spending money, and you're just spending money, spending money, spending money, spending money. And so if you're using these apps or using these certain delivery things, you're never going to actually see a real like sense of like, oh, I went grocery shopping, I saved this amount of money. You actually spent more money than you actually like, because now the price has went up. Or even if you go to a different area of town from North Nashville, you might go to East Nashville, the price may be a little bit more different than the price that it was in North Nashville. I started to learn and compare. If I go to the Green Hills area, I'm going to be spending a little bit more in money, whether it's a turnip truck, a Whole Foods, a Trader Joe's, or whatever you want to call it. You're going to be spending more money depending on the area that you're in.
Green Hills Kroger is so expensive. Lord. Metro Social Services Director Renee Pratt says the crisis of food insecurity across Nashville has made her postpone retirement. Sarah Grace, what exactly is the city doing to feed people right now?
Yeah, so there's kind of two buckets of that I talked about in the story. And Renee is a good example of trying to find a solution to this other part of why people are hungry, which is not a food desert or access in a physical way, but just how unbearably expensive the cost of living has become for a lot of people. She was saying that over the last couple of years, but especially this year, they've seen an increase in people who need like direct food assistance, like think food bank, think giving out boxes of food. And so while last year they were having at their Donaldson office a drive where you could come get a box of food for your family, they found people from even out of the county were coming. They were lining up at 5:30 in the morning to make sure they got a box. So she felt that there was this exacerbated need. And she pitched to the city and got some funding for them to go out into communities where this was especially needed, like North Nashville, and do pop-ups that are nearby and more accessible where they could give out food boxes. They did the first one of those, I think, about 3 weeks ago now in 37208, right where we're talking about with this food desert. And they ran out of food in like 15, 30 minutes. Like they immediately gave out hundreds of boxes of food. It's pretty clear that they don't have enough food to give it to everyone who needs it. The other side is what I mentioned earlier, which is the mayor's office is doing this call out to try to figure out what the more long-term solutions are to creating like grocery stores and that physical accessibility piece.
Okay, so we know North Nashville has been underserved for decades, and we know that big grocery stores don't want to come to neighborhoods where they think they won't make money. But the people living in those neighborhoods need to eat, regardless of their income levels. Are there things that the city could have done to help North Nashville be better served without gentrifying it first?
That's a great question. I don't know specifics to say like X time the city didn't do Y thing that would have fixed this. But I do think generally for it to have existed for 20 years and for there now to be the call out to start the process of coming up with the ideas, it certainly could have happened sooner.
Carlos, you said you have big ideas. What would you and your neighbors like to see? What does the solution look like in a perfect world?
I think kind of similar to what Sarah was saying, I think we have to be more proactive than active. It's been an issue for years. I mean, it's just like anything. The speed traps don't come until you start hearing people move into your area. We've been speeding through this North Nashville area for years. Now we got speed bumps. The walkable, the bike lanes. You barely see anybody riding bikes though. But we got 1 million bike lanes. It's so many of those things to where people kind of come in and complain about a neighborhood in the area that they just literally moved into, that they have no clue about the makeup of the demographic or who lived here before, or what's the history. And a lot of people don't care. And we need to understand exactly what we're doing and how it's going to change and how it's going to affect the next couple of years going on down the line. And just like the ideas and those issues, I'm tired of giving out ideas and they're not being flushed out and flourished, but also to the point of where tired of giving out ideas and we're not seeing the change, and also it's not being reciprocated as far as the community aspect. It's like, we can give an idea, we can give a thought and ideation. We're never included in the part where it's time to be fruitful. it's always, what do you want? Okay, how are we going to do it, when, where? And then when it's time to actually execute, we're always X'd out of the equation. And so that's the part where it's like a lot of those community members, or a lot of people like myself, is just like, yeah, I know, I understand what we could do, what we should be doing. But it's like, if we don't have a buy-in, if we don't have access to those points, what does it do for us as a community? Because at the end of the day, whoever comes in and gets that whoever gets the contract or the whatever, they're going to win, and they're going to forget about the conversation that you had before you had the actual land or building or all those things that you talked about and need of the community and why it's important. And so a lot of stuff that we're talking about, like, I'm sure it was 20 years down the line, they never thought North Nashville would be this desirable location. North Nashville is the makeup of Nashville in general. Everything flows through North Nashville, no matter what side of town you're on. We have 3 HBCUs. We have so much history. We have, it's just from North Nashville to Bordeaux to the Gold Coast to all those different things that you have that actually give us the identity of Nashville and Tennessee in general and beyond. So a lot of the things that you see that started in North Nashville has impacted the rest of the world and the communities around us. But how do we always not take care of home first is the problem that we don't speak about. It's always, it was their fault, or they should have done that 20 years ago, or somebody from the community should have stepped up and done this, done that kind of thing. And it's always a pointing of the fingers, a blame game in a sense when it comes to the part of actually who's going to actually set out and do the work.
Well, that's why having you on our show is so important. And listeners at home, I'm going to preach a little bit, but it's understanding who has access to the table and who's invited and whose voice is actually being heard as we see all this development happen.
And shout out to all the people that are doing the work as well. There's so many different organizations that are in the North Nashville corridor that are doing amazing work, that are putting spotlights on, certain issues and problems, especially like you all. But it's so many out there, and you got to do the work. And there's so many that I'm learning about, that I'm coming across that, somebody may have the answer and we just haven't talked to them, or they haven't had the right platform or the access to the table like you're talking about. And so I want to tip my hat to the people that are, and I'm always open for conversation for those people as well, because it was a point where I didn't know something and somebody had to tell me. And so it's always the same as well. Like, knowledge, iron sharpens iron. And so that's one thing that we always got to remember and learn.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Toodles!